Charles Dickens was born just outside Portsmouth in 1812. He was born there because his father, John Dickens, worked for the Navy and was posted to wherever the Navy wanted him to go. That's why, in 1817, John Dickens and his family came to Chatham. And they lived in a house in Ordnance Terrace for the next 5 or so years. At that time, the household was already quite large. There was John, of course, the father, Elizabeth, the mother. There were 3 children, Fanny, the eldest, then Charles, and his younger sister, Letitia. They lived with an aunt, Aunt Mary, and they had 2 servants. They were very much a part of the Chatham community. And for Charles, they were really important years in his development. It's hardly an exaggeration to say that it was in Chatham that Charles Dickens first became a thinking, feeling human being. And he had experiences there that stayed with him throughout his life, and indeed many experiences which inspired his later work. What were they exactly? Well, I think it's important that Dickens's first experience of urban life is in the Medway towns. He is our great urban writer, a writer of cities and the people who live in cities. And we often associate that with London. But it's in Chatham, it's the busyness, the dirtiness, the excitement of Chatham that I think first lights that fire inside him. Chatham was also distinctive, of course, because of the very large number of service personnel who would have filled up the streets and the pubs and the theatres of the time. And there was something quite distinctive about Chatham in the early 19th century. Its river, the Medway, was full of prisons, prison ships. Now these had first come to the Medway during the Napoleonic Wars to hold mainly French soldiers who were being captured in the battles on the continent. After Waterloo in 1815, all these prisoners were repatriated, but the ships themselves stayed. And after a gap of a few years, they were used for housing convicts who were awaiting transportation to Australia. And these are the ships that the young Dickens must have remembered. He remained fascinated and appalled by prisons throughout his life. He was a great prison visitor. He wrote about prisons, and of course, in one of his most famous works, Great Expectations, the young boy Pip is surprised in a lonely churchyard by the escaped prisoner Magwitch. Magwitch needs 3 things from Pip. He needs food, he needs drink, and he needs a file. Because he's wearing these. The convicts on the hulks on the Medway in the early 19th century were kept ironed, unless they had shown particularly trustworthy behaviour, so that these could be released. Magwitch needs a file to remove the irons so he can make good his escape. What else was it about Chatham that stuck in the young Dickens' mind? The theatre. Dickens loved the theatre quite passionately and remained important to him throughout his whole life. And it's in the Medway towns that he first experienced the lively, even chaotic evenings spent at the theatre in those days. He wanted to be an actor. Indeed, as a young man in London, he actually arranged an audition. But having had a cold on the very day of the appointment, he had to cancel. And while awaiting another appointment, he happened to get his first piece of writing published in a magazine, and his life headed off in a completely different direction. But he wasn't done with the theatre at all. He continued to visit and enjoy plays, but he also continued to be active, but on a private basis. But Dickens's amateur theatricals were not like other people's. He used to involve all kinds of friends and family. He used to get well-known painters to do his scene decoration for him. He had the very latest in lighting effects. He altered his home to make the stage as large as possible. And he produced his own publicity. This is a playbill for something called the Tavistock House Theatre. Now that's Dickens's home in London. And it's a playbill produced especially for a press night, where Dickens invited critics and journalists to come to his own home and look at this production, which has a list of famous names, artists, writers, but also Dickens's friends and family, performing in a play specially written for him by Wilkie Collins. Now this playbill and the performance of this play marks something of a turning point in Dickens's life. Having performed it for friends and family, and even Queen Victoria, in its own right, he decided to take it on the public stage to raise money for the family of Douglas Jerrold, who had died. When he did that, he realised that his daughters would not be able to perform in such a large theatre that was necessary to make the money to make a significant contribution to the Jerrold family finances. So he went looking for professional actresses instead. And that's when he first met the Ternan family. And it's the youngest daughter, Ellen Ternan, that he falls in love with and remains faithful to for the rest of his life. It also meant, of course, that he would separate from his wife, Catherine, and look for a new start. Where? In Kent, in Medway, the place he remembered from his years in Chatham. So in 1859-1860, he comes to Gad's Hill Place, just outside Rochester, where he spends the rest of his life. And it's here that he writes some of his most famous works. Great Expectations, of course, but also a great deal of journalism, where we learn to look at Medway not just through the eyes of the adult Dickens, but through the feeling of remembering, of learning what it was like to be a child in the early 19th century, experiencing those exciting things for the first time. He established a new routine at Gad's Hill Place. Lots of work, of course. The work always took place in the morning. It was in the afternoon when he would round up everybody who was staying in the house and lead them on long walks through the Kent countryside, marching ahead with things like this. Dickens's walking stick. This one's particularly important to us because after Dickens died in 1870, it was left to his sister-in-law, Georgina. Now, Georgina kept some personal effects of Dickens's, but many she distributed through the people who had known him. This particular stick was given to a Rochester councillor, and when he became mayor, he decided to donate it to the new Rochester Museum. And you might be able to see on it a silver plaque telling us that this is the very stick that belonged to Charles Dickens. The wonderful thing about handling Dickens's walking stick is that it takes us right into the heart of his leisure time, what he got up to at Gad's Hill Place. For understanding his working practices, we're lucky enough in Rochester to have the chalet, the place in the summer where he used to work on his latest articles or novels. And it's in that chalet, on the 8th of June, 1870, when he wrote his last words, completing the 6th instalment of The Mystery of Edwin Drood, a book he was never to finish because after lunch that day he suffered a stroke, lingered throughout the afternoon, but died the following day, 9th of June, 1870.